Julio Ramirez asks, does this game play on the Sega Genesis Model 3?
Yes, it should do. The golden rule is if it plays Sonic 2, it'll play Tanglewood. We haven't put any weird tricks or demo scene style stuff in the game that should trip up any of the genuine Mega Drive or Genesis models or emulators or clone devices. So if it plays Sonic 2, it should play Tanglewood.
JB Maru asks, why the 4 MB limitation?
It's mostly a technical restriction because the 4 MB limit is the maximum address space the Mega Drive can access. If you go beyond that, you need some sort of bank style switching like the Street Fighter 2 cartridge or something like Pierre Solar. It means extra technology needs to go onto the PCB, not just a bigger chip. It's a little more complicated than that. And to make use of that, that means rewriting the engine. It needs having a specialized emulator set up for QA testing, and more importantly, my dev kit doesn't support it. So that was quite a stop for that one. So yes, it's a technical restriction, really.
Interesting. How come the Sega Dev Kit doesn't support it? Was it common for all Sega Dev Kits or just the early ones?
It's because it's a Sega Mega CD dev kit, not an actual Genesis dev kit. So there's some quirks there, there's some functionality left out on the Genesis side because it concentrates mostly on Mega CD development. I can only make use of the space for the Mega CD BIOS for the Genesis side, and that's with the Mega CD part switched off. I think for original Genesis development, back in the day, they'd have had to have specialized hardware too. I don't know of many development kits that can make use of bank switching by default. They'd have had to have special boards added onto it to be able to do that.
If your dev kit is aimed at the Mega CD, does that mean we can expect a Mega CD port in the future?
Possibly, one day. One thing I was going to look at was having the soundtrack on CD. So if you play with the cartridge and the CD in the drive, it'll take the game from the cartridge and the soundtrack from the CD. I'll only continue on with that if I get the time. I know Watermelon's last game did that, and there's a karaoke style game that did it, I think. Some sort of jukebox game. So it has been done before.
Gaming Pal Ollie says that while the game looks great, the background layers don't seem to match the quality of the foregrounds. He even cites Pocahontas as an example of well-designed backgrounds.
Yeah, that's mostly because all our effort and memory usage went into the foreground initially. We had a lot of ideas for the background, but we didn't quite realise just how tight on space we were going to be. We've exhausted all the ROM, all the RAM, and pretty much every CPU cycle we can get hold of, so there's no space there to even decompress some extra background tiles. We've used up all the VRAM in almost every level, so to go back and redo the backgrounds, we've been rewriting major parts of the engine to be able to afford better compression and things like that. It's a lesson that I've learned very hard for our next game. I've got a big document of how I'm going to rewrite the next engine to be able to better handle backgrounds. But I'm afraid for Tanglewood, all the effort's on the foreground. Some of the later levels do have different backgrounds. Some of them also use some effects. There's a desert level later on where the background uses a wavy sine wave effect to look like a heat wave. So we can use cheap tricks like that to try and get more out of the background we've got. But I'm afraid redoing the artwork for that isn't an option available to us at the moment.
Gaming Pal Ollie also asks if the game could have a health bar instead of a one-hit death mechanic.
Well, I could put some limited lives in there if you're okay with a game over screen. Bear in mind it's a hard game. It's something along the lines of Flashback or Another World with regards to difficulty. So having limited lives and making you go back to the start of the game when it's game over is probably a little bit unfair. Also bear in mind that we're supporting things like home arcade systems and emulators and some of the clone consoles for this release. And a lot of those have built-in save mechanics where you could save state and load state. And I see a lot of people using those even with older games on emulators, and it's a little bit cheating, so I'm not entirely sure having a finite lives in a game over screen is really the best way to go when people can just circumvent it with technology like that. You're going to die a lot in the game, I'll admit that right now. It's not an easy game, so you're going to be thankful there isn't a limited life system later on.
Daniel McCormick says he can't imagine how hard it must have been for a Sega programmer to make a game like Columns or Tetris work within the limit of 20 sprites on a single scan line. How did you work within the sprite limits of the Mega Drive?
That's real tricky, especially considering some of the sprites are pretty large in the game. The Jack monster, the Elder monster, there's the Borgus boss in there. They're absolutely massive sprites, and yeah, we did have quite a lot of problems with that. We ended up spreading some objects around the levels a bit more to account for it. Originally, we were going to have fireflies were going to be plentiful, a bit like Sonic rings. You're going to pick up 5 or 10 every second or something like that, but we very quickly hit the sprite limits there. So we went back to the drawing board, we redesigned what the fireflies were going to do, and instead we've got about 8 per level, and we've hidden them in places. So it's now a scavenger hunt to find those things, and sprite limit was the reason for going back to the drawing board there and doing that. Otherwise, there are some tricks to help. You can reuse sprites, so if you need to draw a sprite more than once further down the screen, you can reuse the same sprite by repositioning it. There's all sorts of little tricks that can help. The biggest one is optimization. Don't use any sprite space you don't need. If you've got a giant multi-sprite made up of 20 sprites, if any of those are blank spaces in there because of how the artwork is authored, make a system to remove those blank parts of the sprite, so there's not so much drawn. There's lots of little things that can help, and all together it makes for a good game.
Daniel McCormick also asks, how do you design sprites and music for Tanglewood?
Sprites were done by several people. The original artist for Nim was Drew Lade. Unfortunately, she's not on social media, so I haven't had any contact with her for quite some time. Armin Marderosian, he was a cutscene artist and character artist. He worked on Piazzolla. And a guy called Krzysztof out in Poland, who's the finishing artist, and he's done some extra little animations for me and things like that. They've all had experience with either Mega Drive or Amiga, so they're already used to working with limited palettes and trying to fit things in memory and stuff like that, and they've absolutely knocked it out of the park. I'm really proud of their work. So while I'm not an artist myself, so I can't really answer that, I can say, we got the right guys. That's how we managed it. As for the music, a guy called Nathan Stanley out in Australia did that. He goes by the name Freeze Dream, is his artist name, and he definitely knows what he's doing because he released his own album on cartridge a couple of years ago. So he already had a lot of experience working with the Mega Drive and its various chips. So yeah, I guess hire the right people if you want the right work done.
Gabriel Falls asks, what's your favorite thing that didn't make it into the game due to time or technical limits?
Originally, before we ran the Kickstarter, there was an entire level cut. It was a 3-act level. It was quite large, which was set in an abandoned treehouse forest with all sorts of buttons and tricks and traps and stuff like that. But thanks to one of the stretch goals on the Kickstarter, we managed to bring that back. So we almost had to lop off an entire level there, but thankfully that's back. That would have hurt if I'd have had to leave that out of the game, because that was, I think, really well designed. We spent a lot of effort on that. Otherwise, I'm not entirely sure that the backgrounds that you mentioned, we had all sorts of plans for better backgrounds, but obviously we're out of ROM space, RAM and cycles and VRAM. The whole lot is exhausted at this point. I think we had to knock off one of the acts from the final level. The final level is a 6-stage boss, and we originally had another stage to that. Unfortunately, we had to lose one of those stages, but I think 6 is enough, so hopefully no complaints there.
Ryuma King asks, how do you handle sound design? Getting music and sound effects right with only a couple of channels must be hard.
Yeah, it is really hard. It's not perfected yet either. We've still got some bugs left in to fix there. You can thank Seek for that, a guy in the Mega Drive community who wrote the Echo sound system for us. And that has a locking mechanism. So if you're playing a piece of music that's using 5 channels and a sound effect comes in, there's a locking mechanism that'll take one of the channels specifically for the sound effect so that the music can't affect it. Obviously, it means sometimes some instruments cut out, but you can hear that in games all the way back in the day. Sonic 1, 2 and 3 do the same thing. If you play a sound effect on top of a piece of music, occasionally there's a mismatch and it'll take one of the channels away. Unfortunately, it'll have to stay like that, but it only happens very rarely, so unless you're really listening for it, you won't catch on to it. Effective use of the PSG is another thing. The sound designer we got really knows that chip as well. I've heard a lot of games that either use just the PSG or just the FM chip, and being able to have a content pipeline that makes use of both really easily, as if they're all the same kind of channel, is really smooth. I think we've made good use of the PSG to try and fill in the gaps there.
Home Gligar 13 asks, what language was the game written in, and what compiler, toolchain or build setup was used?
It was written with 68,000 assembler using the SNASM assembler. I've got a license for that. It came with the dev kit. So I'm hopefully building the final gold release for that. I'll double check the paperwork. Yeah, most of the tools except the assembler are my own. So I've written my own level designer, my own sprite editor and animation tool, my own audio scripts for conversion, things like that. I've got various exporters for the different graphics tools and sound tools, all written by myself. I call that Beehive. It's a giant package for Mega Drive development that I'm hopefully doing a release of at the end of this year. So yeah, it's mostly my own tool chain apart from the assembler itself.
Ben B asks, what other projects do you have planned for the future? Do you plan to develop for other retro consoles?
Yeah, we're porting Tanglewood to the Dreamcast next. I keep getting various requests for other systems like SNES. Saturn seems to be a popular one. Unfortunately, it's a very difficult thing to develop for. It's also a very difficult thing to publish for because it's got a weird disc format. I'd very much like to do something on Saturn, but the cost is going to be enormous to release something like that. We're experimenting with the Amiga. I've got 2 guys now working on some sort of test, trying to get the first level loaded. We'll see it work from there. I can't guarantee anything. It's a very different beast, even though it has the same processor. Other than that, I'm not entirely sure what other platforms, but we certainly got other projects on the pipeline. I'm definitely doing another Mega Drive game after this, and that'll make its way to Dreamcast too.
Actually, regarding the Saturn port, I know that Mike Tucker, the lead developer for Xenocrisis, is also considering a Saturn game in the future. Maybe you could do a joint venture.
Yeah, certainly could. I've been talking a bit about Bureau quite a lot. In fact, they're second down on my Discord list here. Yeah, we talk quite a lot. Technical issues, cartridge manufacture, legal stuff, things like that. We talk money now and again. We're quite open with each other. We do share our secrets for the better good, because obviously it's good to have more homebrew developers on board. So I'm giving them all the advice I can, and they're giving what they can in return too. So maybe one day we could work together.
That would be awesome! And if you two ever do a joint venture, I want exclusive coverage on all YouTube videos.
Yeah, okay, sure.
Dennis Kenny asks, what kind of toolchain or workflow do developers use for developing Mega Drive titles in 2018?
Big question. Depends which part you're working on, I guess. I guess for graphics, we use off-the-shelf tools like Photoshop and GIMP for authoring the sprites themselves into cells, and then we import all that data into our own tool called Beehive. That's got a built-in sprite editor, animator, so you can create sprite tracks. You can add sound effects to specific frames, positional offsets, things like that. You can change the speed of the animations, add, remove new frames, and then you can preview the whole thing right there in the editor. For backgrounds, it's pretty much the same. We designed the scenes in small blocks called stamps. You input all the stamps into the editor, and then you got a little stamp library where you can place down stamps into the scene. It's got things like bucket fill and copy and paste tiles and stamps around, things like that. And then you export it into one giant map at the end, which then gets compressed. For the audio, it's mostly just scripts. We use the Deflomas tool to author the tracks themselves, and then we've got our own converter scripts to convert Deflomas files to the Echo sound format, which is the sound engine we use. The code itself is just a text editor. I'm using Visual Studio Code at the moment. It's just basic code editor. Or if I'm on the Windows 95 PC for the dev kit, I use Notepad++, and then you just build it with the assembler. Once it's all built together, load it up onto the dev kit, fire up the debugger and hit F5.
Interesting. It seems like there are a lot of tools which make the development of Mega Drive titles much easier. Do you feel it's now easier to create Mega Drive titles, or that it's actually harder because we don't have the original Sega dev kits?
A little bit of both. There's one specific feature missing from most emulators and tools, and that's source level debugging. Getting a dev kit with that working on is a monumental help. Being able to see all your original source and your comments and which files each stuff comes from. You can see symbols, you can see function names, you can see variable names. That's absolutely huge. If you're doing a really big game, we really need an emulator that properly supports us, because that bit can get real tricky. But as for the art side, the sound design side, it's never been better. We have some of the best tools in the industry now, which we didn't have back in the day. That's most because things like rapid prototyping of tools has got a lot quicker, as well as shared knowledge about the system. We know more about the Mega Drive now than anybody ever did back then through reverse engineering, demo scene projects, and the general hive mind that comes with the internet, I guess, the sharing of information. Games could only get better because of the better tools, the better knowledge sharing. But yeah, as soon as we get an emulator with source level debugging, I expect bigger and better things from the homebrew industry again.
So, if I were a Mega Drive developer, which emulator would you recommend? Fusion, maybe?
Fusion's really designed for playing games, so it's a very high performance emulator with high compatibility between games, but that sacrifices some accuracy too. If you're developing games, you want the most accurate emulator available, never mind speed or complexity, because you'll find some hard to reproduce bugs on those, or some bugs that may only work on hardware itself. So you're much better with something like Region, which is a very highly accurate emulator. It's the one I use mostly if I'm not using the dev kit. There's also one called Exodus, which is supposedly a cycle accurate emulator. If I got a really difficult to produce bug and I don't have the dev kit handy, that's my go-to one for the really fiddly ones. There's a new emulator a new emulator already out called Blastum, which is still in development, and that's written by one of the guys in my Mega Drive development Discord group. That seems to be really good now. It's one of the only emulators that can emulate Titan's Overdrive 2 demo, which was quite a big claim to fame, that it was quite a difficult thing to get emulated. That it's really impressive. I'd give it a go.
John650 asks, are there going to be more physical copies available if I miss the Kickstarter campaign?
Yes, definitely. We've started some pre-orders now. We soft launch pre-orders. We haven't yet run our PR campaign for it, but yeah, if you go to our website, you can pre-order one now. And once we've got physical stock in our warehouse, we can open up PayPal payments and sell them for real. So I don't expect us to run out anytime soon. We're going to be making more batches as the orders come in.
Cobalt Lightning is asking, is there any idea on what the price point might be in this stage of development?
Currently it's set at 45 plus taxes, that's GBP, that works out about £54 at the moment. The more we manufacture, the more deals we can arrange with the factories and the price will only go down. So hopefully if we sell loads, we can make more batches a lot cheaper and eventually the price will drop to something a bit lower. So yeah, 45 plus tax at the moment.
Cobalt Lightning is also asking, do you have an estimated release time of the game on Steam?
Steam, I'm not entirely sure. Our plan is, once the Mega Drive version is released, we release the PC, Macs and Linux version, which is an emulated version, and we're going to put that on our itch page. But for Steam, we want to do a PC port of the Dreamcast port, if you're with me, because the Dreamcast port won't be an emulated version, it'll be a full rewrite in C++, which we've already started. It's all going very well, to support things like widescreen resolutions, higher sprite resolutions. We're going to try and get the CD audio rather than the Mega Drive audio in there. It'll be just a Dreamcast worthy product rather than just an emulated Mega Drive version. We're going to spend a lot of time on the Dreamcast version. So for the Steam release, we'd rather see the Dreamcast version ported over to PC rather than the Mega Drive version emulated. So that's going to take a little more time. But you can certainly play the game on PC shortly after launch if you're okay with the emulated version.
Oh, does this mean that the Dreamcast version will be using Windows CE?
No, there's licensing problems there. There's several operating systems for the Dreamcast. The Windows CE wasn't the only one. It has the advantage that the machine itself doesn't hold the operating system. The operating system's on the disk that comes with each game. So the game can choose what OS it runs on. It's not on the machine itself, it's on the disk. So we're using an open source one at the moment where there's no licensing problems.
Perfidious Leaf asks, what is the design inspiration for the Fox? He says it reminds him of Nick Wilde from Zootopia.
I only saw Zootopia very recently, so it didn't play a part in the original design, but yeah, I certainly see the similarities. The character was mostly designed off the back of the world design, because obviously it's a dark, moody platformer. It's not a very nice place to be in, and I wanted a character that was lost and looked scared and really meek, so not a strong brave hero, but somebody who's just trying to get out of this situation as fast as possible and not get eaten in the meantime. So we thought, to convey expressions like terror, we'd need something with malleable eyes and ears. So we went with a fox-style character, where his ears can drop down when he's scared. He's got big eyes to convey emotions, things like that. So the fox design came off the back of the world design. We didn't design the character first. Some of the inspiration came from The Lion King. You'll notice his run animation is quite similar to Simba's. It's got a very high frame count. It's very fluid run animation. So yeah, the Lion King for the Mega Drive certainly played some part in it.
Evil King Gumby asks, what's the state of the physical cartridge production?
We have all the production materials ready, apart from the PCB itself. The game's burnt to the chip during manufacture, so we have to finish the game and get the gold bill to the factory before we can get our PCBs back. But we still have a pipeline on standby ready for that as well. We know what we're doing there. We had a test batch run with the demo late last year. We figured out how it was all done, what it was going to cost, how shipping works, how to get the things inside the cartridges, how to apply the labels, and how to do all that quickly and accurately. So we've got everything ready to go, apart from the actual shipment of PCBs. We've got the cartridge shells, we've got the cases, the cover art's on its way. We've got various stickers and inserts to make it look a bit professional. We've got the packaging boxes on the way, and we've got some space ready to start up a little internal factory to start these made.
Evil King Gumby also asks if the game as it is will fit on a cartridge without any issues.
Yes, it just fits on the cartridge almost perfectly. Every time we add a new feature, we have to do another optimization session to squeeze it in, but we are very close to the end. Not many things to put in now. So yeah, I can say with confidence it definitely will fit on the cartridge.
Thank you so much, Matt. You have been amazing. I'm really grateful for your interview, and I wish you the best of luck with Tanglewood. I can't wait until I get my hands on the cartridge and the Dreamcast port.